Hey beautiful people, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lolly Serunga, and if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back, darling. So if you're new and you've not subscribed, please do subscribe. And if you keep returning without subscribing, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Today's video is inspired by a video that I saw on Malina's channel that she did, I think like last year, if not 2 years ago, where she read a chapter of a book, and I got gifted this book called The Black Girl's Guide to Corporate South Africa by Lindelwa Skenjana. So I got it as a gift and I've not read it. So it's Easter weekend and I was like, you know what, I'm like by myself, I'm spending Easter by myself, so let me read something. So I figured I will start reading this with you guys, and we won't read for too long, but if you do enjoy the reading session, do let me know, and then I'll continue reading sort of the rest of the book in bits and pieces. So without further ado, let's get into the video. I am starting from chapter 1, and chapter 1 is titled Lindelwa. For you to understand my experience of the South African corporate workspace, I need to start where it all began. I entered those hallowed corridors of commerce, having lived a life of wishes and plans for my future. But I began in a specific context at a certain time in post-apartheid South Africa. My name is Lindelwa, which means I waited. I love my name. It was given to me by my maternal grandmother, Nomathemba. I was born in 1988 to a single parent. My mother is a former nurse who practiced in Durban in KwaZulu-Natal. In true African custom, I was raised by her entire family, the village. The village comprised Mama's siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles, and my cousins from the Eastern Cape, Cape Town in the Western Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and Soweto in Gauteng. Mama's friends, who were aunts and uncles from Malawi, Kenya, and Ghana. And lastly, other relatives and family friends in the United Kingdom and United States. My formative years were spent in a township called Lamontville in Durban, where I lived with my mother, my brother, and our live-in helper, Auntie, as I grew up calling her. She was the most fun and loving auntie I could ever ask for. Mom later transitioned to work in the public sector. The busier my mom got at work, the more Auntie became my best friend and bonus mother. We then moved to Pretoria at the dawn of democracy in the late 90s, where I completed all my primary and high schooling. I am the last born of 3 siblings. I have 2 older brothers. The eldest spent his whole life in the Eastern Cape with my grandparents, where my maternal and absent paternal family are originally from. How does a Xhosa woman like my mother end up raising her children in KwaZulu-Natal in the 1980s? The story begins a generation earlier. My maternal grandfather was from Stutterheim, a town in the Transkei, now the Eastern Cape. He made his way to Cape Town, where he met my grandmother. They got married in 1930. They settled there, KwaLanga, and raised 5 children. My mother was one of those 5 children. They were all later sent to attend different boarding schools in the Eastern Cape throughout their high school years. Mama ended up completing her high school years Ohlange in Nanda in KwaZulu-Natal. I was raised by the strength of a woman. In my upbringing, my mother was intent upon surrounding my brother and me with positive role models. The aunts and uncles who frequently came to visit us or whose homes we would visit were serious professionals in their careers, doctors, lawyers, and architects. But more than that, they were loving and supportive parents, raising their children in nuclear families. Their children went to the best schools. My brothers went to decent schools. When Mama could afford an educational investment, she ensured that I had the best schooling experience. Education is very important in my family and is believed to be directly correlated with achieving success. These were the relatives whose choices my mother believed in. She wanted the same for us, her children. Besides being the only girl and the youngest child in my family, my personality was always different from that of my siblings and cousins. I was quiet at times, chatty at times, very shy around strangers, affected by my moods to a greater extent than others, and was highly stimulated by my emotions and feelings. Because my siblings are much older than I am told I tend to have only child traits. I know how to enjoy my own company. As a child, I would bury myself in my books. I loved reading. Growing up, I always wanted to help other children. I set up makeshift extra lesson classes in my mother's yard, and she would look at me with admiration and laugh. I have very fond memories of when my mother and I would bake together. I remember I used to have my own plastic baking utensil set in pink, purple, orange, and green. When I started catching flies with my mother, we began knitting scarves together. During my childhood, I absolutely loved having her as my best friend. I must pay homage to my mother. She was 40 when I was born, and she was intentional and deliberate about the kind of woman she wanted me to become. Of course, our parents can only live vicariously through us to the point where we decide that we will no longer concede to their demands, or rather, their dreams for us. My mother would make me read the newspaper to her every Sunday. The television news would always be playing in the background, every morning and every night. On the weekends, when she was not working, she would play storybook cassettes such as Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella, and the likes. I would sit in her lap and would page through the books as the audio track of the book played in the background. As I grew older, she would take me to the theater and we would watch children's plays like The Wizard of Oz. She opened up my world and encouraged me to dream. This dynamic between us did not last forever. When we moved to Pretoria and Mama started working in one of those national public sector offices, she stopped having the time. Work consumed her life. As an adult now who has the capacity to reason, I understand she did this to give my brother and me a life she never had. However, a part of me slowly drifted away from the comfort of our friendship. Instead, I looked to receive that kingship from other people. Imagine growing up without a father and then later losing your mother to her career. This felt tragic to me, but I did not have the tools to express what I was feeling. Instead, I continued focusing on school and sports, and I made new friends at the convent primary school I attended. Those friends are still my friends today. I believe my mother deliberately took on a strict dictator-type approach to her parenting, almost to guarantee that I would not take anything she did or provided for me for granted. I almost always had it at the back of my mind that I do not come from material abundance, that every cent and every opportunity counts, that I am expected always to do my best and always align with excellence. My mother was not here to play games, and that is the approach she used in raising me. This has influenced how I pursue life opportunities, dreams, and desires. As a child, I would become obsessed with brands such as Pocahontas and the Spice Girls. Once I got to high school, at a Model C school, I naively started to ask questions. I did not understand why my hair had to be processed with chemicals to emulate the flowy, silky texture of non-black girls' hair. I did not understand why English and Afrikaans were the only two official South African languages that were offered in the school's curriculum initially. This changed later when African languages became available depending on the province you lived in. With the help of my equally eclectic best friend, I discovered the likes of Lebu Mashile, Simpiwe Dana, Thandiswa Mazwai, Nina Simone, Lauren Hill, and Erika Badu, women I had never met who looked and seemed to think like me. I was so excited about this new world of the arts and activism I was discovering. This influence continued to shape my identity and my social and political views. During that time, Auntie became the woman I confided in about everything. First crush, first kiss, first alcoholic drink, you name it. Auntie was the first to know and first to give me counsel. Auntie is a mother of 5 children, one of whom is now deceased. She would share every intimate detail about the journey of her children with me. I would speak to and get to know them telephonically whenever they phoned their mother. I spoke to Auntie's youngest son recently, who is about the same age as me. He shared how grateful he was that his mother's salary managed to put them all through school in a village called Matatiela, where they are from. I thanked him in return for allowing me his mother so that she could raise me in our household. I had never drawn this parallel before, but my mother and auntie were essentially making the same sacrifice. Working was critical in order for both of them to ensure that their children were successful. It was easy for me to see auntie as a mother to me. She bathed me, fed me, clothed me, and loved me. That bond is one that grew over 2 decades. Umama knew that her home and children were well taken care of when she traveled on work trips. While auntie could not read and write in English, she would make sure I completed my homework and made sure I had my equipment ready for whichever sport I had the next day. It was always interesting to observe umama and auntie's dynamic. At times, they would be friends. At other times, boss and subordinate. And at still other times, almost like siblings. It was never static, always evolving, depending on what the one needed from the other at a particular time. To me, success is freedom of choice, freedom of movement, the freedom to change my mind and to do as my soul wills me to do. Success means not having circumstances dictate how I should act and having the latitude to decide what to do. To me, success is freedom. My mother's aspiration was for me to become a lawyer or a doctor. These 2 professions were deemed to bring the most success when my mom was growing up. However, I strongly felt that those were her own projections and not my own path. From an early age, I have had strong convictions. I use my gut, my intuition. Something I always wanted to do as a child was to help people become the best version of themselves. A lifelong calling I am still figuring out. We are where God needs us to be. A friend once shared. This always brings great comfort to me. Success to my mother and her generation means stability, a stable career, a stable income, and, God willing, a stable romantic partner. My mother's generation would take no part in gap years or vac years or retreats to find yourself. I find that my generation places a premium on holistic well-being and fulfillment. We believe our careers must be aligned with our purposes, that we must be fulfilled and work with or for organizations that have positive impact on society. Besides being good at mathematics, science, and biology during my school days, I was equally curious about mobile phones, laptops, and broadcasting. I would ask my mom, who decides what TV shows must play and when? How do they get all the shows on time every day onto our screens? Is someone pressing buttons or does a computer do this? I did not get the answers I needed until a relative who was in the information, communications and technology industry explained to me how information technology, information systems, communications and broadcasting work, and informed me about the ICT policy work related to this and to digitization. This single conversation was so electrifying that when the time came for me to apply for university, I applied to do a commercial degree in information systems at the University of Cape Town. Once I was accepted into UCT, I changed my major to complete a social sciences undergraduate degree and later an honors in brand management. Much later, I completed a master's degree in ICT and development. I love taking up things that challenge and excite me. From what I had read about and subsequently learned, I knew that this field was going to shape the future in a huge and meaningful way. My mother just did not get it. She did not understand why I did not just follow a simple traditional career path to become a lawyer, a doctor, or an accountant. But at some point, the more I explained to her what I did and where I wanted to grow and go, the more she leaned in and supported me. My mother sacrificed so much for me to be able to study. She managed to complete her own training as a nurse at a college in KwaZulu-Natal. I used to joke with my friends and refer to Cape Town as my mother's city. She was born in Cape Town and spent most of her young life there. And Cape Town is often affectionately referred to as the mother city. At university, I also wrote and performed poetry. I fell in love with the written word, slam poetry, some called it. I was introduced to the likes of Kojo Bafu, Tumi Mulekani, Saul Williams, Ntate Kyo Rapetsi, Khositsile, The Last Poets, and Stacyan Shin. The more I studied, the more like-minded friends I made, and the more I discovered incredible black female authors and thought leaders. Mampela Rampele, Cindy Wemahona, Bessie Head, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Wangari Maathai, Dr. Pumla Dineo Gola, Sisonke Msimang, Angela Davis, Bell Hooks, Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Mama Gracia Michelle, Mama Zanele Mbeki, Mama Albertina Sisulu, and the like. How blessed I felt as part of the younger black female generation to inherit such powerful literary ancestry. At university, I stayed in res, and all girls' res in the first year and an apartmentisque res in the last 2 years. Having come from an all-girls high school, being in an all-girls residence was not too much of a change for me. Of course, now with the added independence, we could have male visitors. There were of course rules and governance about their visits. A consistent trait I have had from childhood is the ability to make authentic friendships. I made friends with a group of girls in first year whom I am privileged to still call friends today. I suppose several factors pulled us together, from what we were studying to our upbringing, our interests, fate, etc. I value sisterhood. All of the degrees I completed, I achieved with a level of financial distress. My mother never shared this with me at the time. She always just wanted me to focus on my books. I want you to be independent. I want you to stand on your own 2 feet, live in your own house, drive your own car, and not rely on anyone, but rely only on me when the need arises. For as long as I am alive, my child, she would say. These words have stayed with me to this day. A male friend once asked me, "Do you think your mother conditioned you to be overly independent?" No. My mother raised me to be confident and comfortable in my skin. She meant well. Growing up, she experienced women who would stay in unhappy relationships because they were dependent on the partner or relative. I have grown to understand that independence is not expressed in any one way. When I was younger, I interpreted it as not needing help, not asking anyone for help, figuring it all out for and by myself. Now that I am older, I see and am open to interdependence. We all live on one planet for a reason, and that reason is to see how we can coexist, co-create, collaborate. The financial burden of wanting a better life for your children, such as my mother had, is what makes me resonate with all the student protests that spread like a wildfire through South Africa many years after I had completed my studies. The hashtag Fees Must Fall movement, a student-led protest movement, gained traction and public attention in 2015. I remember feeling both guilty and having a great sense of pride at what the student had been brave enough to execute. I felt guilty because my generation is one that was aware of most oppressive regimes that Black people had to live through anywhere in the world. However, the outlook was to grit our teeth and push through so we could be the change we wanted to see in the world. The focus was on acquiring the education our families had not achieved at whatever cost. The aspiration was on being the first in our families to do so and make their investment in us pay off and to make them proud. The obsession was to succeed, do better, and to provide better for our families. I felt guilty because the Fees Must Fall students probably wanted the same, but they were brave enough to spark a movement so selfless to fight for all students who felt excluded by the structural architecture of the system and to address the psychological effects of that system. The system has very specific criteria and it favors certain people over others, determining whether you make the progress you want. Most importantly, you experience the system differently based on what your last name is. This is fundamentally what the students were fighting to relook at and redefine for themselves and those coming after them. As you can see, my situation and upbringing is a mixture of both enabling and what some would consider disabling factors. Overall, despite the challenges, I had a privileged start to a corporate career. I had the technical knowledge and networks of a top South African university and the love and financial support of a parent and much older siblings. My brothers have followed successful professional careers. I have aunts and uncles in the judicial, medical, and education fields, among others. Their positive influence made them tangible examples I could see and touch. My godmother is a specialist medical doctor and her husband was a successful architect. I am now a senior manager in my early 30s and have made progress in the systems of corporate South Africa despite the odds. I want to share my journey honestly to help others. I have laid this book out in the order that a typically corporate career follows after you finally get the piece of paper that recruiters list under requirements. First a degree, then an internship, then an entry-level managerial or professional position, then a mid-level management position, and finally senior management. Everyone's professional career may be different in the future or may have been different in the past, give or take a step. So much of this depends on factors that are outside of one's control. That said, I have included the experiences of other Black women at every stage so that we can share our wisdom, insights, and survival strategies and not feel so alone. We usually get books about corporate South Africa from the older Black generation of successful professionals who first navigated these waters decades ago. The dynamics have shifted, and we need discussions that take that into account. In South Africa, unemployment is a debilitating reality for many young people, Black people in particular. Being a full-time employee has become a privilege for many. While the unemployment rate is relatively lower for graduates than it is for people who do not have tertiary qualifications, there is also a worrying upward trend of unemployed degree holders. A demographic analysis of unemployment statistic reveals continuing patterns from our ugly past, in particular the history of unequal access to opportunities due to discriminatory laws that were based on race and gender. At all stages of one's career, as one moves up the corporate ladder, if one dares to look beyond the veneer of transformation, the same racialized and gendered dynamic manifest that mirror the biases of society. As ostensibly new challenges present themselves, these biases shape the lived experiences of Black people, and Black women in particular, differently. Using my story as a young Black woman, I hope to help those coming after my generation of professionals and leaders, especially in corporate South Africa. My wish is to witness In the near future, young African female professionals being unapologetically themselves at work and fully expressing who they were born to be, regardless of the organizational space in which they find themselves. It is important that we do not allow institutions that were created centuries before we were born and designed to constrain us to dictate how we behave. We must instead challenge those institutions that claim that they exist to serve the people and that their products and services exist to make the lives of the people better. We as Black people are a majority of the people in South Africa, and as women, we make up a sizable demographic to influence the economy. We are well positioned to create the change we want. It is as recently as the 1980s that Black South Africans were required by law to carry passbooks. The apartheid government imposed this law to include African women in the 1950s. It was only in the 1940s that some major political parties, like the African National Congress, opened their doors to have Black women participate and contribute their insights into the political arena, despite the fact that the party itself had been formed in 1912. On the other hand, in the 1930s, white women were permitted to vote and have a say in matters of governance after a 20-year white feminist campaign. It was said that women were not to concern themselves with matters outside the home. In addition, it was only when the Constitution of South Africa was introduced in 1996 that all women in South Africa were formally recognized as equal citizens. Therefore, with all of this as the orbit of our context, who are we not to dare to be great, to dream, to want success for ourselves and all of those around us, even more for those who come after us? Who are we not to? That is chapter 1 of the Black Girl's Guide to Corporate South Africa. So I like that in chapter 1 she just gives us a background of how she grew up and sort of like her social setup and where she studied and all of that. So I think from chapter 2 then it obviously gets into what happens in her journey in corporate South Africa. I'm very drawn to this now because I'm a Black female within corporate South Africa, and I know that it's not easy to navigate, so I'm looking forward to this read. But do let me know if you enjoyed the reading or what you think of chapter 1 so far, and also let me know if you would like me to continue reading the rest of the book with you guys. And yeah, I'm personally looking forward to reading the rest of it. I think so far it's very relatable. Yeah, and if you've listened to the reading until this part, please do comment with let's say a pink heart, and yeah, let me know what you think. Until the next video, bye.